because of my auspicious birth date, I was carried into the palace to be Empress. Not long after I took the Phoenix throne, the Emperor Alexander Wei recovered from his long illness. The drought-stricken region saw rain, and the hostile Chieftain of Western Qiang choked to death in the middle of a meal. Everything pointed to one conclusion. I was the lucky star of Great Jin. What could I do? As the chosen child of fortune, all I could do was sit tight as the palace mascot and enjoy my retirement in the harem. Chapter 1. The Grand Astrologer divined heaven's will and found a set of birth characters that, once seated on the Phoenix throne, would enrich the nation and strengthen the people. And so I was carried into the imperial palace in a grand 8-bearer sedan chair, with drums and gongs beating all the way. On our wedding night, the Emperor Alexander Wei, who had been ill for a very long time, sat across from me in silence for half the night. In the end, he asked just one question. Exactly how much did your family bribe the Grand Astrologer? Great Jin is steeped in belief in gods and Buddha. Everyone was craning their necks, eager to discuss how the Empress might enrich the nation and strengthen the people. Only I, holed up in the palace, was frantically packing my valuables, ready to bolt at any moment before I got drowned in the spit of a disappointed populace. I hadn't even finished packing when the Emperor recovered. The drought regions saw rain, and the Chieftain of Western Qiang, who'd always eyed Great Jin like a tiger stalking its prey, suddenly choked to death in the middle of a meal. My Empress's seat, which had seemed precarious, was suddenly rock-solid. Alexander Wei was silent for a long time before he decided to strike a bargain with me. As long as I didn't harm the consorts, didn't hurt any royal offspring, and behaved myself as the palace mascot that kept the house safe, he would guarantee me a lifetime of wealth and honor and the dignity of an empress. Thus began my retirement. I'd only been in the palace for half a year, but everyone already knew I had no interest in meddling. As long as it wasn't too outrageous, any little squabbles were just theater for me to enjoy with a bag of seeds in hand. Except when it came to food. Anything I was eating, no one was allowed to touch or take without my permission. Not even Alexander Wei. Once, when I was out of Phoenix Palace and he idly ate a few pieces of peach crisp from my table, I threw him out as soon as I got back. The whole palace knew this rule. For Consort Linda to break it knowingly, what was that, if not provocation? Still, considering how deeply Alexander Wei cared for her, he'd even gone against the whole court to give her the title, Linda. For her rank, I only ordered 10 slaps, and purely for form's sake. The palace servants understood the act. The whole round of face-slapping made barely any sound, and Consort Linda's fair, jade-like face remained unmarked. I was the Empress. However favored Consort Linda was, she wouldn't dare truly challenge me, but the servants were another matter. That I could understand. I waved my hand, dismissing the servants who'd kept their heads bowed the whole time, not daring to meet my gaze, and yawned. Consort Linda, you may go. His Majesty will surely come see you tonight. Do prepare yourself to receive him. I'd long since climbed into bed. Only my maid Ruby stood by the door like a withered tree for half the night, insisting on waiting until the young eunuch came to report that His Majesty will spend the night at Wenqing Palace. Wenqing Palace is where Consort Linda lives. Ruby murmured, "Does your ladyship truly have no feelings for His Majesty at all?" I turned my head to glance at her, lazily rolled over, and met her worried eyes. They deserve each other. Every Jack has his Jill. Never heard the saying? Ruby rushed over to cover my mouth. "Your ladyship, mind your words." I pried her hand away and snorted lightly. "What are you afraid of? The 3-point pact doesn't say I can't insult him. I only feel your ladyship is in the prime of youth, yet since you entered the palace His Majesty has never." She trailed off, then lowered her voice. "If you had a child by your side, life in the palace would be easier to bear." I thought it over. Eat, sleep, eat, occasionally watch a play. Life was indeed a bit dull. Ruby actually had a point. Then I'll just raise a few pretty boy lovers in secret. Why is it that after we marry, he can whisper sweet nothings with other women, while I have to keep myself chaste for him? There's nothing in the 3-point pact that says I can't cheat on him. I suddenly saw the light and slapped my palm in approval of Ruby's line of thought. "That's not what I meant." Ruby lowered her head in despair. What you say is one thing, what you do is another. Dishonoring the imperial harem is a capital crime, and one that would only kill me without involving my clan. To make it up to his humiliated beloved consort Linda, Alexander Wei promoted her rank overnight, raising her to noble consort Linda. The front court was in an uproar. Memorials advising him against it piled high on the desk in the imperial study, said to be as tall as a small hill. Munching on melon seeds, I sighed. Compared to me dying drowned in spittle, it looked far likelier that Alexander Wei would be buried under a mountain of impeachment memorials. Noble consort, Linda was a strange one. From a palace maid at the emperor's side, she had come to know Alexander Wei's likes and dislikes better than her own birth date. Every word out of her mouth landed right on his heart. She soared all the way up to become the most favored woman in the harem. Rather than say she loved Alexander Wei, it was more accurate to say she was a dedicated employee. In those limpid autumn eyes, there was never any real affection for the emperor. Only hard-edged ambition hidden beneath a guise of frail gentleness. Strictly speaking, I didn't dislike her. She had both drive and skill. The day after her promotion, I voluntarily ceded to her the authority to manage the 6 palaces. Noble consort Linda looked at me with shining eyes, burst into tears as she bowed low to the ground, and kept saying that she had underestimated the Empress, never knowing I was so magnanimous. I was so stunned, I didn't know what to say. In truth, I was simply worn out by the endless stream of complaints every 2 or 3 days. Your ladyship, Lady Grace, has taken over my cat and refuses to return it. Please be my judge. Your ladyship, Lady Leah, snores in her sleep. I've always been a light sleeper. Please don't let me share a palace with her again. And on, and on, and on. The only thing I gained from all this was a faint understanding of why Lady Leah was out of favor. I stood by the window, looking toward Wenqing Palace, still lit bright late into the night, and listened to Ruby report that noble consort Linda was still handling a flood of petty complaints from the other consorts. I couldn't help clicking my tongue. What a terrifying work ethic. Early summer was nearing. After a long stretch of boredom, the harem finally saw a ripple. Lady Grace was pregnant. She was the first pregnant consort since Alexander Wei's accession. At last he stopped doubting his own body, and, brimming with pride, promoted Lady Grace to Lady Grace of higher rank, personally granting her the honorific Grace. First, to mark her noble character and fine conduct. Second, because she carried a child, Grace suggested flourishing branches and leaves, showing how much he valued the baby. I personally thought the title sounded ugly. For the first time ever, a consort had managed to lure the emperor out of Wenqing Palace, and rumors flew across the palace. Everyone was guessing how highly Lady Grace would rise on the strength of her child. I reclined in comfort, enjoying the soft breeze from Ruby's slowly swaying silk fan, and slipped into my usual nonsense. What's everyone so excited about? For all we know, the child might not even be his. Ruby was numb to my every hour. Your ladyship, mind your words. Seated below, Lady Leah lifted her head, gave a cold snort, and muttered, "Being pregnant is nothing. Giving birth safely and raising the child to grow up, that's the real skill." Lady Leah, out of favor for snoring, was pitiable no matter how you looked at it. On a whim, I'd summoned her to exchange a few pleasantries. After talking for a while, I found her surprisingly entertaining. She also had a peculiar enthusiasm for palace intrigue that was quite different from others. Keeping someone like that by my side was, in its way, amusing. When I drew her in, Lady Leah's eyes lit up. She asked with great anticipation, "Your ladyship, who else is in our faction?" I counted in my head for a long time and then replied honestly, "No one. With you here, that makes 2 of us." People are indeed snobs. Only a few days ago, Lady White had been complaining that Lady Grace refused to return her borrowed cat. Today, she immediately sent loads of cat food and baby clothes to Lady Grace's quarters, adding that it's that cat's blessing to be favored by her ladyship. The speed of that about-face was jaw-dropping. Beaming from ear to ear, Alexander Wei came to consult with me. He said the weather was getting hot and he worried Lady Grace might suffer from the heat. So he wanted to ready Cool Breeze Hall for her to stay in for 2 months. Cool Breeze Hall was reserved for the Emperor and Empress to escape the summer heat. Noble consort Linda hadn't dared suggest moving in. I couldn't believe Lady Grace had the guts to want it. Did Lady Grace say this herself? Only after I lifted my eyes in assent did Alexander Wei reach for a grape and carefully peel it for himself. Lin suggested it. Don't blame her. I was thinking the same anyway. I rolled my eyes at him. The higher the tree, the more it catches the wind. I'm sure your Majesty has heard that saying. No need for me to teach you. You gave Lin power over the 6 palaces for the same reason, didn't you? Alexander Wei didn't look up. His cheeks puffed slightly as he chewed, and I had an almost irresistible urge to jab them with my chopsticks. I smiled faintly, and in a burst of mercy, told him to leave Phoenix Palace on his own instead of personally throwing him out. The chief eunuch lagged a step behind and bowed and scraped to me. Your ladyship, don't anger yourself. His Majesty didn't mean it that way. Before I could answer, Alexander Wei's voice rang out from afar. If you don't move, you can forget about that post as chief steward. Go serve at the office of penitence instead. I ground my molars. Who dared treat the mascot like this? As Empress, with my position supposedly unshakable, I had no wish for Lady Grace to be constantly drifting into Phoenix Palace. If someone with ulterior motives took advantage of her visits and something happened to her in my quarters, best case, she could prove her innocence. If not, in Lady Leah's words, my iron rice bowl post would vanish, my title stripped on the grounds of harming a royal heir. As the saying goes, what you fear comes to pass. Lately, Lady Grace was coming to Phoenix Palace even more often than Lady Leah. She was convinced that frequently seeing me and borrowing a bit of the mascot's luck would help her give birth safely. The best example, everyone said, was Lady Leah. She'd been coming and going to Phoenix Palace for about a month, and now she didn't even snore in her sleep. How was I supposed to gently tell them that a consort's snoring would sound unrefined if it spread? I'd asked the Imperial Infirmary for medicine and secretly added it to Lady Leah's tea, which was why her nights had gradually grown quiet. Your ladyship is kind and magnanimous, a blessed person for Great Jin. I trust that with your protection, this child will be safe and sound. Lady Grace stroked her gently rounding belly, a soft maternal glow slowly spreading in her eyes. In some corner unseen, a cold drop of sweat slid down my back. The bigger the lucky star hat they put on me, the less I could bear it. Lady Leah chewed on the pastries she'd brought and snorted. Feudal superstition is no good. Lady Grace, better spend your time consulting the imperial physicians. That's more reliable. Lady Grace couldn't be bothered arguing with Lady Leah. She just kept lightly caressing her belly. I've already consulted every physician. Only when I'm with her ladyship do I truly feel at ease. All right, I'm tired. You should all go back. Of the 36 stratagems, retreat is best. I had just risen to slip into the inner chamber when a shrill female voice split the air, overlapped by Lady Leah's "Holy shit," shouting the words I least wanted to hear. Your ladyship. Someone help, her ladyship has fainted. Dead inside, I turned back. Lady Grace had collapsed into a maid's arms as if she'd used up all her strength. Under her pale, lavender gown, a thin streak of blood was slowly seeping through. Phoenix Palace was as silent as a tomb. Everyone had gathered, the air so heavy it felt like a pair of unseen hands clutched tight around every throat. Alexander Wei's gaze swept slowly across the consorts before settling on my face. Lady Grace's child has been saved, but I will not let this go. Summon the physicians. His stare made me uncomfortable, and I glared back at him, fierce and unblinking. He seemed briefly choked, and finally withdrew his look of suspicion. The imperial physicians hurried in and knelt. Your ladyship has traces of musk within your body. Fortunately, the amount is small, and your ladyship is usually healthy, so no lasting harm was done. Where did the musk come from? Suddenly, a maid in pink palace robes shot forward like an arrow, fell to her knees, and burst into tears, her shoulders shaking. Your ladyship, this maid can't bear her conscience. Please forgive me. Me? Alexander Wei's gaze changed in an instant. A bone-deep chill spilled from his eyes, the weight of the throne radiating from his whole body. Speak. Her ladyship the Empress was jealous that Lady Grace is with child, and feared Lady Grace bearing a prince would threaten her position. So she ordered Madame Ruby to drug the teacup used by Lady Grace. Your Majesty knows, no one is allowed to touch or take any food from the Empress's table. Lady Ruby personally oversees everything. The cup of tea is still on the table. If your majesty doesn't believe it, summon the physicians to test it." I stared at her in disbelief. Ruby rushed forward, raised her hand, and slapped the maid so hard she toppled over, unable to get up right away. "Insolent wretch! How dare you slander her ladyship?" A physician took the teacup, sniffed it, and his face changed. He fell to his knees. "Your Majesty, there is musk in this tea. The scent is faint, already dissipating, clearly having been present for some time. It was not just placed there." A wave of gasps rippled through the hall. Alexander Wei closed his eyes. After a long time he opened them again, gaze dark as he turned to me. "Has the Empress anything to say?" I let my gaze pass slowly across the faces of the gathered consorts. Some kept their heads down, some looked startled, others wore complex expressions. They were all young, blooming faces. Which one of them harbored such malice, intent on putting me beyond all redemption? Chapter 2. I rose slowly and bent down, lifting the pink-robed maid's chin with a finger. She kept her eyes lowered, lashes trembling like butterfly wings in the wind. "You're not bad-looking. No reason I wouldn't remember you. This maid works in the back courtyard and has never served your ladyship personally. It's only natural your ladyship doesn't recall me." Her previous brashness had vanished. Her voice was now as thin as a mosquito. "You've never served me. How would you know I ordered Ruby to drug the tea?" I gently tucked the loose strands of hair behind her ear. This accusation falls apart with the slightest thought. Do you take me for a fool, or His Majesty for one? The maid seemed to steel herself. She turned her head away from my hand and scrambled to Alexander Wei's feet. "Her ladyship has repeatedly expressed displeasure with Lady Grace's pregnancy. Even a low maid like me overheard it a few times. This maid can't serve such a mistress, and so risked my life to expose her. Please believe me, Your Majesty." Alexander Wei stared down at her from above, his gaze unreadable, his shadowed brows making the hall even more tense. I met his gaze without flinching. He looked away with a muffled sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose, weary. "Guards, drag this maid to the office of penitence and interrogate her with full severity. I want to see exactly which foolish villain is behind her." "Your Majesty is wise." I exhaled in relief and took the chance to flatter him just enough. Had it been anyone else, they might have believed her outright and brought disaster on me. His face eased a little. He waved his hand. "You and noble consort Linda will handle this matter. In 3 days, I expect you to present me with the culprit." The consorts rose in fluttering waves to see him off. Thinking of the memorials still waiting to excoriate him, I couldn't resist a flicker of schadenfreude. Settling comfortably back into my seat, I sipped my tea. The longevity festival is coming. Is this the gift you're all preparing for His Majesty? If the aim was to bring me down, then the most suspicious were noble consort Linda and Lady Grace. If I fell, their chances of charging for the Empress's seat would soar. Then again, what if someone else wanted to frame them, letting us tear each other apart while they reaped the benefits? Of course, there was another possibility. Noble consort Linda and Lady Grace knew very well that the most dangerous place is the safest place. They might have used such a flimsy trap, with suspicion almost pointing straight at them, precisely to throw me off. "Has your ladyship any leads?" Ruby asked after I'd finished my analysis. Thoughtful. I smiled calmly, full of confidence. "None at all." Then I dumped everything on noble consort Linda, ordering her to produce anyone, in 3 days. I'd never had much interest in schemes and intrigue. Since childhood, my mother had stroked my hair and joked that perhaps I'd used up all my plotting in a previous life, leaving me so apathetic in this one. "Mother." I paused, teacup in hand, and gazed at the moon outside the window, my heart a little hollow. It had been just such a full moon night. Every other courtyard was bright with lanterns, joyfully celebrating the Mid-Autumn Festival. Only my mother's and mine lay as cold and empty as the spilled moonlight on the ground. Madame Tao and the other concubines disliked my mother, a former maid. After she bore a daughter, Master Tao never visited again. We became fair game for anyone's bullying. Even our mid-autumn mooncakes were tampered with by someone. After eating them, Mother doubled over in pain, curled on the bed in a cold sweat. I knelt by her bed, over and over wiping her face and body. The household physician I'd urged to be summoned again and again never appeared. Tear-blurred, I stared toward the door. The pallid moonlight, mixed with laughter from afar, stabbed at every one of my senses. Actually, it wouldn't be impossible for them to pin this crime on me, I suddenly said. Harming consorts and royal heirs, and then I'll go to the Hall of Supreme Harmony and publicly curse Alexander Wei to his face. With those crimes combined, would they execute my whole clan? Ruby froze for a couple of seconds, at a loss for words. I caught her terrified expression and laughed it off. I'm joking. Don't take it seriously. At the very least, I couldn't let my mother, deep in the Yellow Springs, be saddled with the label, the mother of a criminal. The Imperial Infirmary records show that no one has drawn musk recently. But according to my investigation, Lady White's family used to trade in medicinal herbs, and she's had disputes with Lady Grace over that cat. It's hard not to be suspicious. I studied noble consort Linda's grave face. It showed nothing. Slowly, I lowered my head to drink my tea. And the maid? What did she say? Noble consort Linda hesitated a moment, then suddenly dropped to her knees. I was so startled I choked on my tea and coughed for ages. I failed in my duty. The office of penitence used too heavy a hand. The maid couldn't withstand it, and died. I calmly took the handkerchief and dabbed the tea from my face, then leaned back on the soft couch and stared at the elegant line of her profile. I asked a seemingly unrelated question. Do you want to be Empress? All of Phoenix Palace went so still you could hear a pin drop. If I said no, your ladyship wouldn't believe me. She thought for a long time, then laughed in bitter resignation. Just because of some talk of heaven's will, you became an unshakable empress. And I, using every means, only climbed to a consort's rank. How could I not be jealous? Honest enough, I was satisfied. She straightened her back and looked at me, eyes blazing. Please instruct me, your ladyship. I thought myself flawless. Were there no proof, you wouldn't ask this. How did you come to suspect me? I blinked innocently. But I didn't. I just asked on a whim. You confessed all on your own. She stared, stunned, and even Ruby's fan paused in midair. For the first time, I saw clear regret and hatred in noble consort Linda's eyes. To be fair, no test is done without some basis. Whoever could easily place an outsider among my attendants and even alter the servant roster had to have high enough standing that others would obey without question. Whoever procured musk from outside likely bribed the palace staff in charge of purchasing. Those men had seen the world and were experts at lining their own pockets. Ordinary sums wouldn't buy them off, let alone for something as sensitive as musk. Alexander Wei was extremely wary of powerful in-laws. All the consorts selected were from minor official families. The only ones with enough money were high-ranking consorts with generous stipends. Eliminating impossibilities left only two suspects, Alexander Wei and noble consort Linda. As for why I included Alexander Wei, he'd never truly believed I was a suitable empress and scoffed at heaven's will. For a ruler who wanted to sit firmly on the dragon throne, being adept at manufacturing crimes was a basic survival skill. I'm not a clever person. This was as far as I could reason. Without any real evidence, all that remained was to probe them, openly and covertly, and see if any cracks appeared. From the moment noble consort Linda picked up my milk cake in provocation, I'd known she was full of schemes. If she had just stuck to her denial, there would have been nothing I could do. Instead, she used that little stunt to test whether I was truly foolish on the surface and wise within. And at the same time won Alexander Wei's pity. After a night of pillow talk and perfectly timed tears, she was promoted again. If I'd had half her methods, Mother wouldn't have been humiliated for so many years. The purchasing servants were tight-lipped, swearing they knew nothing and refusing to say more. That was no surprise. To admit involvement in harming a royal heir meant certain death for them, whereas palace rules still frowned on torture ending in death. Faced with those odds, of course they clung to life. As for why someone like noble consort Linda, who'd always treated palace rules as decoration, broke so easily, that I truly couldn't understand. But for now, the crucial thing was to deliver noble consort Linda to Alexander Wei. I was eager to see his face when his beloved consort, whom he'd personally ordered to assist with the investigation, slapped him with this betrayal. Lady Grace gave birth. It was a frail little prince. The child was born on the very day Lady Linda's confinement was lifted. No matter how much he loved her, Alexander Wei had to deal with her seriously. Her rank and title were stripped, she was demoted 3 steps and confined for half a year. Only when he held her face and asked in pain, "Why did it come to this?" did he show any reluctance. Consort Grace poured all her energy into raising the child. I visited a few times. The baby was so skinny he looked like a little mouse, his brows furrowed even in his sleep, as if something troubled him deeply. Lady Linda, on the other hand, had grown thin. Her bright, headstrong charm was gone, replaced by a deep stillness. Even so, she was still treated well. Everyone knew she was the emperor's favorite, just waiting for the day she would rise again. As for me, I was up to my neck in the year's great affair. The prince's birth finally blew away the dark cloud on Alexander Wei's face that even the longevity festival couldn't dispel. In high spirits, he allowed the families of all consorts to enter the palace for a New Year visit, including mine. Since I'd entered the palace, Master Tao and Madame Tao had sent me letter after letter of false concern, trying to cram 10 years' worth of neglected affection into a single night. They were more persistent than a rash. I read them all and replied to none. Before I was chosen, they treated me as if I didn't exist. Afterward, they called themselves the Empress's clan, terrified that Alexander Wei's next target might be them if they didn't cling to me. I protested repeatedly that I did not want them visiting. Alexander Wei only laughed and brushed me off, clearly enjoying my growing frustration. It made my resentment climb yet another few notches. I watched him roll out of Phoenix Palace and thought coldly, since they're so eager to deliver their heads, I won't be polite. At year's end, snow finally fell on Capital City. Everywhere you looked was wrapped in silver. The thick, silent snow covered everything, as if the world had always been a blank white, and all this scheming and filth were nothing but human delusions. Your servant greets your ladyship. May your ladyship live 10,000 years. The formal greeting pulled me out of my trance. I lowered my eyes to the woman kneeling below. She wore a silver-white rabbit fur cloak. The silver hairpin in her bun trembled lightly, her lowered gaze making her look the picture of gentleness and propriety. Madame Tao rarely dressed so plainly. Clearly she had a performance to stage. I understood at once, lifted my hand to excuse her bow and said coolly, "We haven't seen each other in some time. Madame is looking more and more blessed. It seems my presence here has truly robbed you of good fortune all these years. I must apologize." At my mention of those long-ago words, when the women of the inner courtyard used to sneer from on high at Mother and me, Madame Tao's expression flickered. Then she hurriedly pasted on a smile. "Your ladyship's words will be the ruin of me. You are the mother of the realm. Everyone says the Tao family raised their daughter well. Hearing such praise every day, of course I feel at ease and content. Ultimately, it's all thanks to your ladyship's blessings." Honey on the tongue, a blade in the belly. I knew Madame Tao all too well. Having drawn blood with one jab, I ignored her flattery and instead let my gaze drift around the hall. I was told Bella also entered the palace. Where is she? You know how naughty that child is. Once she came in, she insisted on wandering about. I had no choice but to let her go. Her first thought on entering the palace was not to greet the Empress but to wander about. I knew perfectly well what they were after and put on a suitably worried look. That won't do. His Majesty has been in ill humor over state affairs lately. Just yesterday he had a palace maid executed for dancing in the imperial garden at midnight, trying to seduce him. If Bella happens to run into him somewhere and offends him with her words, there's nothing I can do. Madame Tao's eyes changed at once. I watched her shifting expressions with some satisfaction and hid a yawn behind my sleeve. So that was the plan. A neglected concubine-born daughter became Empress. How could such a thing not be a thorn in the heart of the legitimate wife? How could the foolish Tao family rest easy without another daughter in the harem to depend on? Ever since visits were allowed, Bella had been practicing song and dance day and night. She'd fainted from exhaustion more than once, or so I'd heard, but gritted her teeth and carried on. They'd given up on relying on me and instead planned to send in another, more controllable daughter who shared their interests. Once she secured favor, they could openly call themselves imperial kin. Thinking of Bella's sudden disappearance and Alexander Wei's habit of walking in the imperial garden after court, it wasn't hard to see the connection. My hand froze as I lowered my sleeve. The Taos were a minor official's family. How did they know the emperor's schedule? That evening, Alexander Wei came to my palace. I'd already heard that he'd given Bella a scolding. I was delighted and greeted him with a smile. "Well now, has your majesty come to demand an explanation?" With the empress to hold his favor, Master Tao still wants another daughter to secure it. His ambition isn't small. He sounded more sardonic than angry. "Given the empress's wisdom, I'm sure you understand me. I told you I didn't want them in the palace. It was your majesty who insisted on inviting trouble." I snapped back without mercy. He suddenly waved everyone out and fixed me with a deep, intent gaze. Only then did I feel a cold sweat break across my back. "What? You don't like what I said and plan to kill me to silence me?" His eyes slid over me like a snake, up and down, finally stopping on the bead of sweat that hadn't yet fallen from my temple. "About Vera Tao, tell me frankly. The Grand Astrologer's reading. Did your family tamper with it?" "What?" Being lumped together as your family with those lunatics, I was about to let loose when he spoke again. I asked the Grand Astrologer once more today. He said it was karma, debts of a previous life being repaid in this one. Who taught him to spout such nonsense that wouldn't even fool a 3-year-old? Excellent. A fool of an emperor, here to pour oil on the fire. My knuckles cracked as I clenched my fists. I looked him in the eye, smiling with the gentleness of a bodhisattva. Our 3-point pact didn't say I couldn't kill the emperor. Alexander Wei knew I wasn't one to bluster. So before I truly lost my temper, he dropped to his knees in a sliding bow and apologized. In the end, he tossed down a reluctant, "I must owe you from a past life," and fled to seek out his former confidant Lady Linda for some moonlit comfort. Ruby had heard everything outside. She came in pale and panting. "Your ladyship, it's one thing to say such things in private, but how could you say them right to His Majesty's face?" I remained unbothered and calmly picked up a pastry, imagining it was Alexander Wei as I crushed it in my fingers. He won't. As long as the weather stayed fine and the land stayed peaceful, I'd be safe another day. And I'd noticed long ago that Alexander Wei had a kind of bottomless tolerance for me. No matter how wildly I jumped around in front of him or how outrageous my words, it was as if something held him back. He never truly punished me. Of course, I didn't think he had any feelings for me. To love someone is to soften every time their name comes to mind, warmth filling your eyes. Just as he did whenever Lady Linda was mentioned. I had no explanation for his tolerance. Perhaps even Alexander Wei himself had never thought it through. I shook my head, scattering the stray thoughts. "Enough. How goes the investigation I asked for?" Ruby darted a glance around, then bent close to whisper in my ear. "The Tao family once sold a servant. That person entered the palace and now works in the household department." "What does he do there?" "He's in charge of purchasing." Bella, whose eyes were still puffy from crying, was summoned to the palace again. To be fair, Bella had inherited all of Master Tao and Madame Tao's best features. Snow-white skin, almond eyes, cherry lips, pretty, charming, with a hint of flirtation. Even though the Taos weren't high-born, suitors still beat a path to their door. This time she behaved. She dressed as she always did at home and kept her head lowered, silent. "You truly want to enter the palace?" I got right to the point. Bella seemed to have expected the question. Her expression didn't change, but she shifted her gaze toward the door instead of answering. Madame Tao had always been ambitious, picking and choosing among suitors, determined to use a marriage contract to vault her daughter up into the ranks of the truly noble. When the decree arrived proclaiming me the heaven-sent girl, she'd almost fainted in front of the eunuch announcing it. It took a whole day for the twist of rage on her face to smooth out. I'd laughed for a whole day, too. "That seat as Empress should have been mine," Bella said suddenly, staring intently at the phoenix embroidered on my skirts. I thought of the joke Lady Leah had told me once, and held back Ruby, who'd moved to scold her. I kindly spread my skirt wider so Bella could see more clearly and asked in a gentle tone, "Oh, do tell this Empress what injustice you've suffered." Bella's face twisted with rage. She lunged for me, only for Ruby to twist her arm and throw her to the ground. Her neatly done hair came loose and fell around her face, leaving her looking disheveled and pitiful. "What are you so proud of? Father submitted the wrong set of birth characters back then. It was you who stole my phoenix throne," she cried, sprawled on the floor, hysterical. I stopped mid-seed, staring at her, stunned. "What did you say?" "Fair features, lovely looks." That was Madame Tao's only wish when Bella was born. Father's rank was low, he had few concubines. With her beauty and a conveniently timed pregnancy, Madame Tao had defeated his first wife, that rustic village woman, and become the official wife. That woman, though poorly schooled, had a backbone. Seeing what her once gentle young husband had become, she took the divorce papers and left without looking back, easing Madame Tao's mind. Her only lingering worry was another pregnant woman, a clever maid she could never find a chance to get rid of. When Bella learned that her mother had once considered swapping babies to guard against this rival, she'd felt a pang of coldness. But her parents had always showered her with love, while that other mother and daughter were forgotten in a remote yard. Over time, Bella's misgivings faded, until the decree came naming Vera Tao as the heaven-sent Empress. Madame Tao had flown into such a rage she'd lost all decorum, smashing every porcelain object in sight. When she finally stepped out, even her face seemed twisted. Bella had no particular hatred for that mother and daughter, nor could she understand why her own mother was so angry. She went in to comfort her, and when she came out, her own face mirrored that same furious distortion. That year, Father had gone out seeking opportunities. Madame Tao and that concubine had gone into labor on the same day. When she heard that the concubine's child was also a girl, Madame Tao barely had time to relax before her maid, who dabbled in feng shui, told her in fear that young Mrs. birth characters were inauspicious, a life of misfortune. Those characters could be offset if the child was raised by her side, but if the master ever learned of it, it would only drive a wedge between father and daughter. The other child's chart, however, showed a star of authority seated at the center. She was destined to hold power in the future. To conceive Bella, Madame Tao had used all sorts of medicines. She'd succeeded, but her body was left frail. Bearing this child was already a miracle. A second pregnancy would be all but impossible. After a long struggle, she swapped the birth charts submitted to her husband, watching with relief as father abandoned the concubine and her daughter to a cold courtyard. To cement his faith, she'd done much behind the scenes, turning a once healthy woman into a chronic invalid, further proving her inauspicious nature. Little did she know, Mother has wronged you. As Madame Tao wept out her confession, Bella's cheeks burned hot and cold by turns. With a scream of, "You ruined me," she ran from the room. In the main hall, Vera Tao sat surrounded by servants, Father holding her hand affectionately as they chatted and strolled. Bella watched, swallowed by rising jealousy that nearly burst from her chest. The one he should be holding, she thought, should have been me. All the palace servants present dropped to their knees. They shook like sieves, tears streaming, terrified I'd have them dragged out and silenced. Bella stayed where she'd fallen, sitting on the floor, chin raised in stubborn defiance. Unfortunately for her, I didn't react the way she wanted. I let out a short laugh, bent down until I could look her straight in the eye, and lowered my voice. "If I were you, I'd never shout this to the world. I'd have kept it as a bargaining chip, used it to get everything I wanted." "With a mind that shallow, you think you can control the harem?" Bella sneered. "If you're so capable, why couldn't you protect concubine May?" My heart jolted. On reflex, I raised my hand and slapped her hard. The sharp edge of my nail guard carved a long, bloody line down her pretty face. With a short cry, Bella clutched her cheek, eyes full of venom. "Your ladyship, Beauty Linda begs an audience." The tension was shattered as a palace maid stepped in to announce the visitor. She froze at the sight of so many people kneeling on the floor, then stammered, "Shall this slave ask Beauty Linda to leave?" I pressed my fingers to my brow, suddenly tired. "No, let her in." The purchasing servant had left Tao House and later been helped by Linda Lin, who'd recommended him for work in the palace. Alexander Wei had given me too little time then. There were at least a dozen purchasing servants. No way to investigate them all properly. Only now had I managed to pull together a few clues. Since they were all here, it was time to settle some old accounts. Truth be told, I didn't really know what Linda Lin wanted. She seemed all about her career, intent on the Empress's seat, even to the point of using moves tantamount to suicide. Yet something still felt off. Since the founding of the dynasty, every empress had come from a great clan. The emperor needed that powerful maternal family to balance the web of forces within the harem. To prevent those in-laws from amassing too much power, the imperial line had never placed much stock in direct versus collateral, legitimate versus concubine-born. They chose the heir by merit. If all the princes were useless, they'd sooner adopt from a side branch than put a fool on the throne. Alexander Wei was even more suspicious than his predecessors. He doubted heaven's will from the start, so he simply never spent the night in Phoenix Palace, cutting off my chance to bear an heir. Which suited me fine. The blood and screams when Consort Grace gave birth gave me nightmares for 2 days. In my dreams, I was the one in endless labor, pain tearing me apart. Just when I thought I was done, the midwife's smile looked like that of a ghost. "Hold on, your ladyship. There are still more to come." When I woke, I'd think of the years Mother and I spent neglected. As I grew, her strength ebbed day by day. In the end, she passed on just before my coming-of-age ceremony, leaving me to howl my heart out without ever again lifting a hand to stroke my hair and call Vera. A year later, my marriage became the subject of tea-time discussion for Master Tao and Madame Tao. How best to use a concubine-born daughter with no support to bring the family the greatest benefit. Before they could decide, the Son of Heaven ordered every family with unmarried daughters to submit their birth characters. Mine were chosen, and under Madame Tao's hateful gaze, I left that ice-cold household. Then I ascended the Phoenix throne, sat in the Middle Palace, and spent my days listening to tales of harem spats. Watching the consorts fight for favor wasn't exactly thrilling, but it wasn't a bad way to pass time. Linda Lin's provocation and promotion. Consort Grace's pregnancy. Linda's failed attempt to frame me and her subsequent demotion and confinement. Consort Grace's safe delivery. Bella's entrance into the palace. My instincts told me something connected all these events, some detail I'd overlooked, but no matter how I thought, I couldn't grasp it. I rested my chin in my hand and watched Lady Linda walk in with measured grace. With Alexander Wei's overabundant favor, she'd already become a target of all. If he made her empress, I couldn't imagine how many ministers would be banging their heads against pillars in protest the next morning. Bella's eyes flickered, and she turned her head slightly, avoiding Lady Linda's gaze. Lady Linda retracted her look, then bowed serenely. "Your servant greets your ladyship. You needn't worry. Whatever the birth charts say, you are Great Jin's rightful empress." I massaged my forehead. Barely half a stick of incense had burned. Which traitor ran that fast? "So you think I care deeply about this Phoenix throne?" I cocked my head. "For me, the best thing about being empress is that I can have my mother honorably entered into the ancestral shrine, posthumously titled, and allowed to enjoy respect and glory in death. If life is bitter, what good is glory after death?" She smiled lightly, her expression returning to the soft, gentle air I remembered from before. I wholeheartedly agreed and smiled back. Exactly. That's why I've sworn to drag the entire Tao family into the grave with her. I just haven't yet found the way. It's vexing. If I can lend your ladyship a hand, would you plead for a favor on my behalf? Ask His Majesty to let me leave the palace? Lady Linda raised her head. Her face, as lovely as springtime flowers, was filled with earnest seriousness. Chapter 3. After the rain, the evening glow was bright, the night air mild and clear. Linda Lin's name came from an impulsive whim of the young emperor, commemorating the dusky, rain-washed sunset of their first meeting. She hated it. Not the name itself, but the absolute power behind such casual naming, leaving her no room to refuse. She hated that this power didn't belong to her. From then on, no one would remember Kathy. In the deep palace, there was only Linda Lin. She'd been sold into the women's quarters at 5, already a budding beauty. Seeing her looks and quick wit, an older matron decided to take her as a foster daughter, planning to groom her for the dragon bed and ride her rise to the top. After some quiet maneuvering, this blooming girl was placed as a maid at the emperor's side. She was skilled at reading faces and sweet in manner. Before long, the young emperor developed feelings and invited her into his harem. Beauty Linda, concubine Linda, Lady Linda, consort Linda, noble consort Linda. Her rise was so swift that even the front court took notice. While being cursed as a femme fatale, she also received letters from great clans trying to curry favor, sent by every possible channel. She knew exactly what they wanted: to control her, to make her a puppet dancing to their strings. She studied them for a long time before picking out one letter from a small official family in capital city, House Tao. Among all her suitors, they alone were not a great clan. Tracing the words of flattery with her fingertip, Linda Lin's lips curved in a thin, unreadable smile. When they decided a Tao daughter would be Empress, Linda Lin was gently kneading Alexander Wei's shoulders. Her nails dug into her palms. She swallowed her fury and maintained her usual role as soothing confidante. House Tao? A minor official, nothing more. Alexander Wei leaned his tired head against his hand. Of all the birth charts submitted, only hers matched. The Grand Astrologer insists she's the one, and told me to treat her well. Does your Majesty believe it? She asked. Whether I believe doesn't matter, the ministers do. He turned to take her hand. Seeing her expression shift, he thought she was jealous and hastened to reassure her. Don't worry, I will never fail you. In short, the Tao girl's Empress seat was a done deal. For fear that consort Linda would be angry, House Tao rushed to have that purchasing servant pledge his loyalty to her. They even revealed the truth of Vera's mother's death and the details of the swapped birth charts, promising they had no real affection for Vera. Even with one of their own as Empress, their hearts were with consort Linda. She mustn't distance herself from them. Listening to the messenger's words, Linda Lin thought only two words. How stupid. With parents this foolish, their daughter couldn't be much of a threat. It wasn't until the day of the imperial wedding that she finally saw the Empress. Cold and gorgeous in bearing, lazily elegant, she frowned as the consort's titles were announced, and failed to remember a single name. She looked like she couldn't be bothered with anything. But beneath that languid air was a pair of eyes, cold and sharp. In half a year as Empress, Vera Tao held authority over the 6 palaces and exercised it not at all. She watched everything with cool detachment, as if she truly believed in letting things take their course. Only when Linda Lin took the risk of using a plate of milk cake as bait did Vera's lazy facade crack. Years ago, Vera's mother had been ruined and killed in that cold courtyard because someone switched her cakes. It wasn't some deep wisdom about going with the flow. I was just lazy. But for her to poke at that old wound, knowing what it meant, and use it to test me, that really made my blood boil. So you've always held a grudge that His Majesty wouldn't let you manage the 6 palaces. You teamed up with House Tao, plotted to overthrow me, and then planned to reveal the truth about the swapped birth charts. That way you could bring my unfit sister into the palace as your puppet empress, right? Lady Linda tried to dismiss the servants, but I refused, saying a good story should be shared. Now, watching the staff tremble as they longed to sink through the floor, I stroked my chin, amused. Linda Lin laughed, the mockery deepening in her eyes. Did you really think His Majesty loves me? With favor but no power. I am only a pet he finds amusing. He claimed you gave me power over 6 palaces to keep from drawing fire? Such hypocrisy. Hasn't his overdone favor for me given the ministers even more cause to curse me? He's always known what I wanted. He just thinks I'm unworthy. I've since understood. I cannot beat you, and without power, what's the point? Better to speak plainly and be done with it. The faint silhouette behind the screen stirred at last. After listening for so long, the hidden observer finally stepped out. Alexander Wei looked at me, his face unreadable. This is the good show you brought for me? In the absolutely silent Phoenix Palace, I gave him a smile sweet enough to be poisonous. If not for me, where would your Majesty hear such a marvelous story, with Lady Linda's true feelings thrown in for free? No doubt Bella and Linda Lin were both cursing me to pieces, wishing they could tear me limb from limb. Thankfully, I couldn't hear it. Alexander Wei's face was unexpectedly calm. Normally a scene like this only needed the man and his beloved. Here, with such an audience, he still didn't flinch. It was impressive in its way. A belly broad enough for a prime minister's boat, indeed. Lin, he said quietly, eyes resting on her with complex emotion that finally settled into calm. You were born low with nothing behind you. Your only weapon was my favor. I gave it to you freely, and raising you to noble consort was as far as I could go. Favor always fades, only children in power are worth clinging to. Linda Lin held his gaze now, her former softness gone. Before the Empress entered the palace, you'd sooner let the dowager consort manage the 6 palaces than give that authority to me, though I ranked highest then. Why? When the Empress ceded that power to me, you rushed to warn her off, prettifying it as drawing too much attention. Your Majesty's rhetoric puts me to shame. And who had gone running from Phoenix Palace to whisper that in her ear? Those who hunger too much for power never use it for good. Alexander Wei was silent for a long time. I'd been turning a blind eye, but no more. Empress. He caught me off guard. I choked on a melon seed and had to down 2 cups of tea to clear my throat. Yes, Your Majesty. Lady Linda will leave the palace to pray for the realm of her own will. You'll oversee the arrangements. His gaze slid to Bella, who had been sidelined and forgotten, his tone flat. The Grand Astrologer recognizes only you as Empress. As for your family's affairs, I'll handle them. I was reading a copy of 18 Horrors of Torture that Lady Leah had dug up from who knew where, making little notes in the margins, when she bent over, eyes shining. She gave a little cry when she saw my annotations. Wow, your ladyship has a good eye. I like that one best too. Few women had much interest in such bloody things. I glanced at her surprised, but her gaze was sparkling. You really work quietly but big, your ladyship. Without a sound, you forced Lady Linda out of the palace. I knew I followed the right person. News that Lady Linda was being sent out shocked both court and harem. The front court wept with joy over the Emperor's wisdom, while in the back, the power balance shifted. Anonymous letters piled on my desk daily, each denouncing some consort for secretly courting Lady Linda's favor. They stacked almost as high as the Emperor's memorials used to, threatening to drown me. On top of that, the new head of Western Qiang, eager to follow his father's example, choked to death as well. My long-ignored mascot aura suddenly blazed again. Overnight, my star was back on the rise. Alexander Wei arrived at Phoenix Palace in the dead of night with a complicated expression. Jolted awake, I asked primly if he could accept sleeping on the floor. He looked at me for a while, then sighed. I want to talk to you. About Lady Linda, I guessed kindly. The eldest prince's first birthday is coming. I've arranged for her to leave the palace that day, to pray for the prince and the emperor, as she goes into retreat. Her things are mostly packed. He was quiet for a long time. Did she say anything to you? After that scene in Phoenix Palace, Alexander Wei never set foot in Wenqing Palace again. The few servants who'd stayed to listen to the secrets there were guarding their lives. Their lips were sealed. Wild rumors ran everywhere, debating how a once-beloved consort had fallen so far. Not really. He gave Linda Lin a formal charge, then quietly dealt with Tao House. I'd wanted to tear them limb from limb, and they'd falsified imperial omens on top of that. My father was exiled to the frontier. Madame Tao took her own life under the weight of it all. Bella went into exile with father. Tao House collapsed in record time. It was so quick and neat, I still couldn't quite believe it. Thus thoroughly bought, my attitude toward Alexander Wei softened. I even, out of sheer obligation, lectured him. In essence, you and she were just exchanging benefits. You wanted the feelings she provided. She wanted power, second only to yours. Now the trade is uneven. She doesn't want to do this deal anymore. That's all. When he was staying at Wenqing Palace every night, showering Linda Lin with every sort of overt and hidden affection, and Lady Leah was whispering, "This is almost romantic." I'd honestly thought this carefully chosen young emperor was a fool, ready to light beacons for a smile like that stupid king of Zhou. Now I saw he was nothing of the kind. Linda Lin had no family, was physically frail, and unlikely to bear children. As long as she had no power, no amount of favor would hurt him. At her striking beauty and gentle manners, she made a perfectly serviceable vessel for his love. Weighing his options, Alexander Wei had chosen her to be the harem's brightest star and a counterbalance to other forces. Unfortunately for him, what she wanted most was exactly what he least dared give. Her attempt to frame me only proved her ambition. What truly made him discard her was her dealings with officials. trying to build her own power base in the front court. That crossed an emperor's bottom line. So I knew exactly why he came to Phoenix Palace that night. Linda Lin had fallen, and I, heaven-sent mascot with Mary Sue Luck, a family ruined beyond redemption and no taste for power, was perfect to take her place. But I really did want nothing more than to coast until retirement, preferably outliving him so I could be Empress Dowager, tending flowers and teasing birds, enjoying real peace. Once Ruby pieced this together, she deeply regretted ever asking if I truly had no feelings for the Emperor. She kept repeating Lady Leah's phrase, calling me too wise to fall in love, which swelled my ego for a while. Alexander Wei's love was a burden I could not afford. It would kill me. In the end, I earnestly recommended Lady Leah, who always seemed starry-eyed about palace scheming. I even swore she'd never snore again, and bribed the grand astrologer, who did nothing all day but divine, to tell a harmless little lie. That in a previous life, Alexander Wei had wronged me, and now at great cost had begged heaven for a chance to make amends. But I had long since let it go, and only wished him well from afar. That calmed his visits to Phoenix Palace. These days, I spend my time playing with the growing flock of children in the palace, burning incense at Mother's memorial, and gossiping about everything under the sun with a few congenial consorts. Every now and then, a letter makes its way to me from Linda Lin by mysterious means. Life is quiet and full. Quiet is good. If it stays this way forever, that's good enough for me.